name is Carmen. I'm the Executive Director of the North Shore Schools Foundation, and I am thrilled today to bring you a bunch of people who care a lot about the foundation and then the work our North Shore School District does. You are going to have the opportunity to have all of your utmost secret questions answered about those really hard questions that you never know who to talk to. And if you're from the district or you haven't had the opportunity, Patsy Treece is exactly who you would talk to if you didn't know who to talk to about something. She is a great resource. I am thrilled today because my dear friend Linda Humphrey will be seeing us. Linda is a stakeholder that is larger than life in our community and has made an impact that is huge. And so we love having her be a part of our legacy committee. I will let her take it from here because you hear enough from me, but we are grateful. So I want to invite everybody to come back to the screen. And if you're watching on Zoom, you can be in speaker view. Otherwise, you will see us as we are and we're on Facebook Live right now. So thank you. And Linda, take it away.
Thank you, Carmen. I'm so pleased to be here on this particular event because it's so important to all of us, especially any of us connected with North Shore. It's the North Shore Schools Foundation Legacy Committee, and I'm on that committee. That's why I'm here talking to you. And I'll be introducing our guest speaker, who is a North Shore person as well. As a matter of fact, her children attended Lockwood Elementary. And those of you who know me know that I was principal at Lockwood Elementary. Talk about a great tie. And one of our guests this evening in attendance is Ann Madsen, one of the former principals of Lockwood also. Go Lockwood Leopards. So
yay, Leopards.
Yay, Leopards. The North Shore family is truly a concept to behold. We believe in it, we perpetuate it, we relish in it. It's a good thing. It's good people doing good things for students, for families, for children, and for all of our future. We are pleased this evening to introduce to you Patsy Treece, who is a national expert in clarifying, helping people clarify what do you want for your family to know about your wishes at the end of your life. What are your values? What do you believe in? Where do you want some of your money to go? She has an expertise and is nationally known to help us with those answers to those questions. She's spent 35 years at Harborview, the trauma center, as a registered nurse, master of nursing, and in the research department in this whole arena. We are very, very pleased to welcome her to our legacy series this evening. Please note that in 2 or 3 months, we'll have another legacy event, and we will promote that to you, send out links and information on it. We are attempting to provide this as an educational program for all of our North Shore family and beyond, because we know we all believe in education. So with no further ado, and Patsy will clarify whether or not she'll take questions during her presentation or at the end. But I'm going to turn it over now to the national expert and a Lockwood Leopard, Patsy Treece. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Linda. What a wonderful introduction. I hope she didn't oversell me. Ann Madsen was the principal at Lockwood whenever my kids were there, and I was just teasing her that I think my son spent more time in the principal's office than he did in his actual classroom. So good times. I'm going to start sharing screen now. And let's see. Did that work? It didn't. Let's see, share screen.
It's best if you do.
Yeah, I'm doing it. There, is that it? Did that work?
We see you.
Oh, you see me. Let's see. Well, this isn't. Well, I know how to start. I can't get the
I got it.
You got it?
Mhm.
I can't get it to come up.
I've got it.
Okay, you can see it now?
Advanced directives.
Okay, great. So, as Linda was saying, my background is in critical care, and so the things that I'm going to be talking to you about are things that I have been intimately involved with. I also spent 25 years on the ethics committee at Harborview, so I get called in on these more difficult, challenging cases. So, I'm going to talk to you about some stories and some real people that I've met over the years. Just so you know, I don't have a conflict of interest in terms of financial, and my views are my own. They're not the views of anybody at Harborview, and they're not the views of anybody at the North Shore Schools Foundation. So anything that I say is just me. So what is an advance directive? The thing that people typically know about is the living will, which is also, you can use the living will, you can use advance directive. Advance directive is more of a global meaning. It can be either the living will or the durable power of attorney, which we'll talk about in just a sec. But it's basically a document that makes explicit what your healthcare wishes are if you are unable to speak for yourself. It only applies when you are unable to speak for yourself. So sometimes people have a fear that if they fill out an advance directive, like my husband particularly, if he fills out an advance directive, I'm going to pull the plug on him while he's trying to eat dinner or something. And so that can't happen. It only applies if you can't make decisions yourself. The other document is the durable power of attorney for healthcare. And this is a document that names who you want to make decisions for you if you're not able to make them for yourself. It's abbreviated as a DPOA, durable power of attorney, and then sometimes it's slash healthcare. And I'm going to talk about each of these individually. And we're also going to talk about the POST, which is not really an advance directive, but it's something that I think people need to be aware of, and that is a physician order for life supporting therapy. So why is it important to have an advance directive? The biggest reason is to make your wishes known, to make sure that you get the level of treatment that you want. But I will tell you, when families are in this situation where their loved one is either in a permanently unconscious state, or they're going to be, they're a terminal condition, they're not going to survive more than 6 months, it is such a comfort for the family to be able to pull out that advance directive or that organ donation card and say, this is what he or she wanted, this is what we're gonna do. And in fact, some families, whenever they are pulling out that organ donation card, they feel like donating organs is something that they are doing as a like honoring their loved one's wishes. So it's best if the people who are going to be making your decisions, if they know about your advance directive beforehand, because we've also had surprises where people didn't realize the extent of the advance directives. So a living will or an advance directive only applies if I have a terminal condition or I'm in a permanently unconscious state. That's in Washington. And it's really important that I make that distinction in Washington, because in some states, a living will only applies if you have a terminal condition. It doesn't apply in the permanently unconscious state. And the other thing about a permanently unconscious state is before many doctors will declare you in a permanently unconscious state, you have to be in a coma for 3 to 6 months. The sometimes this happens pretty frequently. We can tell by the CAT scan or the MRI that somebody's brain is so badly damaged that we can predict that they're not going to have a good recovery. But there's a lot of gray area in between. We can tell you're not going to have a good recovery versus you might have a good recovery. You might have a fair recovery. We don't really know. We can't tell from the tests, and the only information we have to go on is what you're actually doing. So are you squeezing my hands when I ask? Are you holding up 2 fingers? Can you give me a thumbs up? That type of thing. On most forms, this is a limitation of an advance directive. On most of the forms, the choices are to either withdraw the ventilator and or to withdraw or withhold feedings. They don't list some of the other things. And this is the situation that I've been in before, is where they've got an advanced directive. It says they don't want a ventilator. It says they don't want tube feedings. They're in a permanently unconscious state, or they're have a life expectancy of less than 6 months. And what they really need is dialysis, and it's not covered. Well, if you had talked to your durable power of attorney and said, I don't want aggressive treatment when I'm dying, they could extrapolate from that conversation that you don't want ventilator, you don't want feedings, and you don't want dialysis or any other kind of invasive treatments. And that's why it's so important to talk to the person who's going to be making those decisions. Legal and ethical concerns. It is both legal and ethical to withdraw or withhold any unwanted therapy, including feedings. A lot of people are okay with discontinuing a ventilator, but they get a little nervous about withdrawing feedings, because feeding to us seems like it's a nurturing thing that you do for someone. It's interesting because people who work in hospice, the nurses in hospice, say that a death where the patient has not been getting fluids or feedings is actually more comfortable than a death where the person is receiving both feedings and fluids. And the reason for that is because if you're getting tube feedings, you most likely have diarrhea, because it's very, very common with getting tube feedings. And if you have fluids going, you're likely to be incontinent of urine, or you might need a Foley catheter, but those are prone to get infected. And so a lot of this, it boils down to, and this is a big nursing concern, skin breakdown. And skin breakdown can be very uncomfortable for people. So hospice nurses believe that it's better to they say a dry death is a more comfortable death. So here's an example of a guy, a 52-year-old guy. He had what we call a cardiac arrest, but what's generally known as a heart attack. He got bystander CPR. And by the way, Seattle is a great place to need CPR, but it's a bad place to faint, because you're likely going to get CPR if you faint in public. But we have the highest per capita of people trained to do CPR in the community. So frequently when we get these people in, they've had CPR by bystanders, and then they get CPR when the medics get there. And the only downside about bystander CPR is that they're not able to infuse oxygen. So if they're doing rescue breathing, and now they say to just do compressions, but you're basically exhaling your carbon dioxide into their mouth. And so without supplemental oxygen, you can't really oxygenate the blood. So this gentleman comes in, he's unconscious, which is common after CPR. He has what we call a anoxic brain injury, meaning that during the time that he was having his arrest, and his heart was not beating and his lungs were not breathing, he had a lack of oxygen to the brain, and now those brain cells have died. There's 2 medical teams involved, and this is something that happens a lot in the big medical centers, because in addition to cardiology and neurology, he had his regular team that just is his run-of-the-mill ICU team that was taking care of him. Neurology says they can't predict his chances of waking up. They can say that it's poor, but anoxic brain injury doesn't show up well on CAT scans or MRIs. Usually it's the bleeding that shows up well, or if a whole area has infarcted, it'll just show up as bright white. But anoxia doesn't really show up. So they can't guarantee that he will wake up or that he won't wake up. He has an advanced directive, and it says he does not want a ventilator and he does not want feedings. Cardiology wants to do an angiogram. And if you know what that is, or if you don't know what that is, it's where they stick a needle in your, usually in your groin, and then they'll thread it up to your heart, and they'll put it in your cardiac, your cardiac vasculature, so the arteries that supply the actual heart muscle, and they'll see if there are any blockages there. Because he had this heart attack and they don't know why, they want to see if he's got blockages there. And if he does, then would they want to treat them because he's at risk for the same thing happening again, the cardiac arrest? It's not going to have any effect on his ability to wake up. The family is uncertain about if he would want that, because he says he doesn't want a ventilator and he doesn't want feedings. And they didn't know what to do. If they found blockages, would it be appropriate to put stents or do cardiac surgery in someone who has this anoxic brain injury and may or may not wake up? Ultimately, in this case, the family decided that he had made his wishes clear, and they felt like he would not want to have the angio. And so what we did was moved him to comfort care, which is where we only take measures to keep the patient comfortable. We don't do things to prolong their life, which actually we think of as delaying death. Things we can do are we can give mass fluids to keep a blood pressure. We can put you on medications that squeeze your blood vessels down so that your blood pressure goes up. And there's a lot of different things that we do to kind of manage people. And when we move someone to comfort care, we don't take those steps. And we also, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but we make them a DNAR, a do not attempt resuscitation, so that if their heart should stop, they don't want any action taken. They don't want us to do CPR and do the shocking and all that. And while I'm talking about that, I'm going to just say that the people on TV do way better CPR than any hospital I've ever worked in. They actually had a research team sit down and watch all the arrests on TV, and they had about an 86 to 90% recovery rate, and not just recovery like long drawn out rehab, but like I got CPR yesterday and today I'm singing a song in a lounge, like really good recoveries. In the hospital, if you have an arrest and it's related to anything except a primary electrical disturbance in your heart, so any other reason except you went into what we call ventricular tachycardia or ventricular fibrillation, VFib, if you may have heard that term. If you have CPR for a reason other than that, you have a less than 6% chance of leaving the hospital intact. About 2% of the people will make some kind of recovery, and the other 4% are not going to recover their mental capacity and will most likely end up spending the rest of their life in a skilled nursing facility. Okay. So things to consider, and I'm so happy. Oh, Linda mentioned two things. One, she mentioned that your values were important, and she also said about questions. So write your questions down, because I'll get them at the end because I can't see anybody's face. Or if you put them in the chat, I might be able to see them. I'm not sure when I'm sharing my screen if I can or not. But your individual advanced directive is a reflection of your values. And people tend to be on one end or the other of this spectrum, or somewhere in between. So if they value independence above everything, they may not want life-prolonging therapies if they're going to face a severe disability, or if they're going to be permanently unconscious. And this is the type of existence where one lives in a skilled nursing facility. Typically, the care is too much for people to be cared for at home. They get tube feedings because they're unable to eat for themselves, and they have someone clean them up when they soil themselves. We generally don't leave the catheters in the bladder because of this. It predisposes them to get urinary tract infections all the time. So the person would be soiling themselves in the bed and have feedings going. And they're typically not able to respond to family, so they don't recognize family when they come. Some of them may develop sleep and wake cycles, but typically there's not a lot of cognitive return. People that value the sanctity of life, these are people who believe that every breath they take and every beat of their heart is precious, and they're willing to accept no matter what kind of quality of life, because that's where their value lies, in that, the sanctity of life. This is frequently a religiously held view, this in the sanctity of life. And this 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 is a challenging thing for a place like Harborview, because we have people come in who don't have any family to make decisions for them. And it's really challenging to know what to do with someone who doesn't have family to make decisions for them. So, one of the things I think is, if I held this view of valuing the sanctity of life, what I might what I might tell myself before this happens is that even if I can't respond, the fact that my family is coming to see me, and maybe they're getting comfort out of seeing me, then that would make it worth it for me, that I'm making it easier on my family, or that they are able to come and see me, and by seeing me, they do preserve my dignity in a way. It's a challenging concept. So I'm going to leave this slide up for a couple of minutes if you want to take a picture of it, because there's these are some of the resources for getting what I think are good advanced directives. The 5 wishes is my favorite, and the reason it's my favorite is because it talks about not only what do you want in terms of, do you want a ventilator, do you want tube feedings, but it also talks about your values. It talks about what you might want, music you might want played at your funeral, what kind of funeral arrangements you want. So it's a several-page document, and it lists these 5 different things, and it's a really good one. I got these for my in-laws, and my mother-in-law is a piece of work. I love her dearly, but she's very aloof. And so when she filled out her 5 wishes, and then she gave it back to me, because my husband and I will be the ones making decisions for them. And one of the things it says in the 5 wishes book is, how do you want to be remembered? And I was particularly interested in what she had written. And she wrote, I want to be remembered as someone who was happy. And it really changed. I know it's a silly little thing, but it really changed how I sort of viewed her, because I would never have expected her to write that. I would have expected her to write, I'm really strict, or I'm really inflexible, but not, I want to be remembered as happy. And then the State Medical Association has, they have a pretty good one. It's less comprehensive than 5 wishes, but it's also good. It meets all the requirements. And then this toolkit for healthcare advanced planning from the American Bar Association looks really good. I've never seen one of those in person. I've seen the other 2 in the hospital, but these are 3 good resources to look in. The 5 wishes in the Washington State Medical Association, you can go to those and you can actually download the forms. If you want their printed copy, you have to pay, like, I think it's $1 for the 5 wishes and 75 cents for the Medical Association. I think the American Bar one was free, but that doesn't make sense because that's lawyers, right? So a durable power of attorney for healthcare decisions, DPOA or POA for healthcare, it's totally different from a power of attorney for financial decisions. So frequently they're 2 different people. Like, what a lot of families do is one kid is in charge of healthcare decisions and the other kid is in charge of the money decisions. And that seems like a pretty common division of labor, and also kind of fair. It identifies the person you want to make decisions for you if you're unable to make them for yourself. And like I said in the beginning, it only applies if you're permanently unconscious or you're in a terminal condition. So they're not going to make decisions while you can still speak for yourself. And while you can speak for yourself, you have the right, ethically and legally, to refuse any and all treatment. So just because a doctor says you need a certain procedure, you don't have to follow through with that if it's not something that is consistent with your healthcare goals. The DPOA is especially important when the person you want to make decisions for you is not your legal next of kin. So if I want my husband making decisions for me, he is the highest on this list of the hierarchy in Washington State, so he would naturally make my decisions. If I feel like he is not able to make decisions, I might ask my adult children, or I could ask one of my nurse friends. And in fact, I am the DPOA for several of my nurse friends, because we get kind of jaded working at the bedside, and they have really different views than their spouse. So they don't want to put their spouse in a position where they'll be making a decision that maybe doesn't go along with what the spouse views as, good care. And they want less treatment than many nurses want less treatment than the public at large. About 2 years ago in Washington State, they made a requirement that our advance directives must be notarized. The Washington State Medical Association and my boss gave testimony on this to the legislature. We tried to get them to not do that. It seems to be an unnecessary hurdle, and I'm not sure what the motivation was. But I'll tell you, we have honored many advanced directives that were not notarized. So don't let that be the thing that stops you from doing it. This list is who we go to. We go to the guardian first, the spouse, then adult children, then parents, siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and interested parties were just added about a year ago. And this was a wonderful addition to the hierarchy for us at Harborview, because as I mentioned, the homeless people that we frequently see are in this position where they have this devastating injury, or they've had a long anoxic injury and they're not going to wake up, and we don't have anybody who can make decisions for them. One of their friends who might say, we used to sit around and talk about what we'd want if this happened, we can appoint that person as a decision maker. There's hoops they have to jump through, but it makes it easier for us to do what the person may have wanted whenever we don't have a legal next of kin. This is what I was just talking about. So it could be a friend. Cousins, grandparents, aunts, and uncles were not on the list before, and that used to make some people so mad, especially if the grandparents had raised the grandchild and they were not able to make decisions. The other thing, I'm going to go back just a sec, if the person you want to make decisions for you is not your legal next of kin, and the thing that I've seen played out more times than I care to remember is a gay couple. One of them has a critical injury. The legal next of kin is their parents, who they've been estranged from for 20 years. The person who morally and ethically would be the better decision maker is their partner, but their partner has no legal bearing unless they have been appointed as the DPOA. So what should you do? Basically, appoint a DPOA and complete the advance directive, and then discuss the advance directive with the DPOA. I've had people dutifully bring in the DPOA of their loved one, and then when we say, this one, for example, this 86-year-old female, she had she infarcted a whole half of her brain, and so she was not ever going to wake up, and she wouldn't be able to survive off the ventilator. We asked the family if she had a living will. They said she did. They brought it in, and when we told them that she didn't want a ventilator and she didn't want feedings, and we'd already done more than she wanted to do, so we were going to discontinue those therapies and in accordance with her wishes, because we thought they brought their document in, they must know what it says, and they said she didn't know what she was signing. I've also had people bring the advance directives in, and then when we tell them this, that we've already done more than the patient wanted, they've said that's not her signature. And we're like, why'd you bring it in? It's just people, it's too shocking for them when the person is actually dying for them to absorb this information, because we do this thing where people get admitted to the hospital, and in the beginning we call it a full court press. We're doing everything we can to keep that person alive, and that energy is what the family perceives as going on for a really long time. And frequently what happens is we do that to see what kind of a response we get. And if they respond, then there may be some hope that they can have recovery. But a lot of times there's not a response to our interventions. And then we start running out of interventions. And so we know they're not going to survive. And this is just, they hadn't discussed the advanced directive, so they didn't know. And some other situations that I threw in here for you to think about is the paralysis. So quadriplegia is being paralyzed from the neck down. Usually it's after a trauma of some kind. And some people feel like they would not want to live if they were in that situation. They were unable to move from the neck down. So somebody would have to feed them, somebody would have to clean them. They wouldn't be able to do much. This is a really hard one because we have good research that shows that if in the emergency room, let's say I'm a new quadriplegic, I show up in the emergency room and I beg you to take me off the ventilator because I don't want to live like this. If you don't take me off the ventilator, and then you ask me again in 18 months if I'm upset or I'm glad that you didn't take me off the ventilator, over 90% of people who are surveyed in this situation have said they're glad that they went ahead and got treatment. And the reasons for this are multiple. One, because of cord swelling, so the spinal cord actually swells when it's been torn or broken. It swells. And so because of the swelling, the amount of deficit they have at that time, right after the injury, is more than it's going to be in 3 months when the swelling has gone down, or 2 weeks even when the swelling has gone down. The other thing is that we have a lot of really great adaptive tools that make it so that people are able to do more than they know that they'll be able to do. And so the rehab is very intense with a quadriplegic. And so they might get, a wheelchair that is electric and controlled by blowing. There's several cases where quadriplegics wanted to have life support discontinued. There's a famous one from California, a 26-year-old man who was in a car accident and became a quadriplegic. And he was housed in a skilled nursing facility, a nursing home. He was the youngest person in the nursing home. He was on the ventilator. His day consisted of laying in bed or sitting in the chair, and that was it. He had basically no diversion. So he said that he wanted to have the ventilator discontinued. And because he said that, the lawyers got involved. It went to court. Because it went to court, a social worker got involved, and she got him moved to a group home that had other young quadriplegics in it. He got enrolled in a computer course, so he learned how to do stuff on the computer. And by the time his case came around to the court, he no longer wanted to die. So our society needs to make some choices about the kind of quality of life we're going to ask people to live when we don't have enough resources for every quadriplegic. Like, I frequently have wondered how it would be if every quadriplegic I've taken care of were able to have a rehabilitation as good as Christopher Reeves got. And because we lack the resources to do that, we sort of doom these people to live this kind of chronically depressed life where they're not really doing anything. We had one of the last ethics consults I did before I retired was a gentleman who was 66 years old. He was riding his bike and he fell off, broke his neck. He's going to be a quadriplegic. And he made a very impassioned plea for not continuing him because he had considered quadriplegia in the past. Excuse me. And he knew that he did not want to live that way. And so we did go ahead in that case because he was able to say how he had thought about it before. He had an experience when he was younger with somebody who was a quadriplegic. And so based on his prior experience, he didn't want to do this. It wasn't based on just right now, I'm so depressed about living like this. And this guy planned like a party that he wanted to invite everybody to say goodbye to. So it was really, he ended up having probably one of the best end of life situations that I can think of. Um, Organ donation is, do you want to be an organ donor? Are there any limits? How about tissue? Any limits on that? For 3 years, I was an organ donation coordinator. So I asked people in the hospital if they were willing to donate the organs of their loved ones who were brain dead. And I had a 14-year-old, he was with his mother and his older brother. The dad was playing soccer, and he just fell on the soccer field, but the way he fell, he bled into his brain and became brain dead. And so I was approaching them about donating organs, and he could have donated at that time, we weren't doing lung donation in the Pacific Northwest, but he could have donated his heart, his liver, his kidneys, his pancreas, and then tissues. I'll talk about those separately. And this family, this son in particular, said that he would love to donate organs because he knows his dad would want to do that, but he didn't want to donate his father's heart because he felt that the heart was where his soul was centered, and he couldn't stand the idea of somebody else walking around with his father's soul in their chest. So we can't take organs without permission, and so I supported this family in this decision. It was coming from the son, but the wife, who was the legal next of kin, supported his decision, and so we weren't able to retrieve everything that was potentially available. But if you think about organ donation in the abstract, it's a great idea. But when you get down to the concrete facts of it, it's an incision that runs from the sternal notch down to the pubis bone, and all of the organs can be lifted out and donated. And it's quite graphic when you think about it concretely. So that's an important thing to talk with your family about. And also tissue donation. We can do corneas, we can do whole eyes, and with that, there's no change in burial that's needed. We can take skin. Skin comes off in about a 1/100,000th of an inch thickness, and it's used for burn patients. The people have to have transplants from their own skin before they can go to the hospital, before they can leave the hospital. But donor skin can be used as a temporary biological dressing. The other thing is, I just read the other day about, they just had a bilateral hand and face transplant. If you donated your face and hands, you wouldn't be able to still have an open casket funeral. But if you donate the lower body bones, you can. And the lower body bones are helpful. Like if somebody has a tumor in the middle of their femur, you can actually take a piece of donated bone, cut that tumor out, and put the donated bone in there. So it really helps preserve the quality of life for people. And then, of course, corneal donation allows people who are going blind to be able to see again. The other things to think about is if you have a pacemaker or an implantable defibrillator, but you're getting to the point where you're not sure you want to keep that thing going. And the docs don't really talk to you about this whenever they put it in you. My mother-in-law has a pacemaker, and she asked me the other day, she said, well, now, how can I die? If I have this thing making my heart beat, how am I ever going to die? And so we kind of talked about that, but it's true, they don't talk to you about being able to turn it off, but you can refuse any treatment. So you can always ask to have it turned off. So when I get my pacemaker, I'm going to talk about it with the doctor before he puts it in or she puts it in, when I want to have it discontinued. And an implantable defibrillator, it's if you're dying of an arrhythmia, you have an electrical disturbance in your heart, that implantable defibrillator will just keep going off and shocking you. And if you are dying, maybe you're dying of cancer, but every time your heart tries to stop, you get shocked back to, back to consciousness. That's unpleasant. So those can also be deactivated. It's just a magnet over the chest. It's nothing invasive. And then a DNAR, a do not attempt resuscitation. This is the getting CPR and getting the put on the breathing machine and that kind of thing if you have an arrest in the hospital. If you have several chronic conditions and you're in the hospital for one of them, asking to be a DNAR is not unreasonable, because if I have terminal cancer, but then I get pneumonia and I get admitted to the hospital, if I arrest that night, I'm expecting to die in the next few months anyway. If I arrest that night, I don't want them bringing me back, because that's just going to be a big blip on my path to a comfortable death. So that's something that you have to ask the doctor about when you're admitted to the hospital. And speaking of that, the POST, the physician order for life-sustaining therapy, it was a wonderful thing when it came to be, because somebody could be in the hospital with a permanent unconsciousness. Their family decided they were going to not withdraw anything, but they didn't want them to have CPR, so they made them a DNAR. Then we transfer them to the nursing home. When they get to the nursing home doctor has to make them a DNAR in order for them to be DNAR in the nursing home, because institutions don't talk to each other. But a POST makes it so that we have to talk to each other. And it looks like, looks like this. It's this green form. The doctor signs it and the patient signs it. I don't know if you can make it out, but the beginning talks about whether or not you want CPR under A, and then B is what kind of medical intervention do you want? Do you want full treatment? Do you want selective treatment? Like, I don't want CPR and I don't want a ventilator, but I would take antibiotics. Or do you want comfort-focused treatment, and that's all you want? And then there's a place for them to write what your condition is. And typically these are not used until your expected lifespan is about 6 months. Other helpful resources if you have a loved one or you yourself are in the hospital: palliative care. Now, I like to think of palliative care as the people who have the view from like the 30,000-foot view. They can see everything, whereas cardiology sees hearts, neurology sees brains. Palliative care can bring it all together, and they're a really good resource if you are wanting to limit treatment and you're getting pushback from the other services. And then hospice is care at the end of life. I say it's best to engage early on. That's because people frequently in the United States do not get referred to hospice until they're only going to have it for a couple of weeks before they die. It's actually better. You get more out of the services if you have like 3 months or 6 months of hospice, so that you know the people who are involved and you understand what the limitations are. And some people have the impression that hospice will come to your house and take care of the person, and that's not really true. The family provides the day-to-day treatment. The nurse may come once or twice a week, and then a nursing assistant might come a couple of times a week and do a bath and that kind of thing. But the day-to-day, minute-to-minute care is going to be given by the family. And depending on where you live, that can potentially limit your choices of which hospice agency you want to go with, or if there's even hospice available. And then I'm going to open it up for questions now. So I'm going to stop, or Carmen, can you stop sharing screen? Let's see.
It is stopped.
Okay, great. All right, let me get my screen. How do I lose this? Okay, any questions? Oh, I see some in the chat. Let's see here.
You have a lot of thank yous and some information. There are actually no questions yet, but I'm sure
No
there's
questions?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Oh, the
I
bank.
just wanted to add, Patsy, that Bank America, at least for us, did free notarizations of those documents that you talked about.
Oh, that's good to know.
And they had some of their employees serve as witnesses for us.
Great.
So
That's great.
that was good. Yes.
Medical people are limited. We are not allowed to be witnesses. Frequently, the hospital will have a notary, but you have to supply your own witnesses because of potential conflict of interest. Like, you're dying and you've got a lot of money, and I insert myself in there so that I get that money. So
Sure.
it's not allowed.
Yeah, and I think it's challenging if you're going to do it at the hospital to have witnesses, especially right now with COVID, right? You can't
Right now it's impossible.
bring anybody. Yes.
Any other questions?
Patsy,
Yes.
I so appreciated your entire presentation. And I have special link to Harborview and also to not necessarily paraplegic, quadriplegic, but quadriparesis.
Oh, okay.
And I actually think you may have been involved in my mother's case at Harborview. She was there after a fall in her bathroom, if you can imagine, and I'm sure you can.
Yeah.
But the rest of the people present need to think about this. She fell in her bathroom and in 1 nanosecond delivered a spinal cord injury to herself, spent two months in Harborview, and the rest of her life, 12 more years, as a quadriparesis.
Oh.
But you know what? She had such excellent care at Harborview. That's where I was convinced that only angels work at Harborview.
Well, I know a few devils that work there. And one who just retired.
You've got the inside track.
No, it's there. It's if I have a trauma, that's where I want to go because the care is outstanding.
It is outstanding, and the decision for her. There were days when I think she thought she wanted to not be here.
Right.
But for the most part, she lived not the same life that she had prior to the accident.
Right.
But a good life. And frankly, it was actually shingles that took her out.
Oh.
Can you believe that?
That's terrible.
Because her neurological system, her whole entire neurological system was impacted so greatly because of the spinal cord injury that the shingles then was so serious with her nervous system that it morphed. Then she got the, as you mentioned, the catheters need to come out because of the UTIs.
Yes.
And then, of course, pneumonia, and then it was over. But my goodness, yeah.
I'm
so
appreciated.
Yeah, it was difficult, but she still had a good life.
Good. That's great.
Good times, yeah. But I just so appreciate Harborview and all of the work that all of you have done there for so many people.
Thank you.
That's good. Well, I was faced with a situation with my father in that he kept getting aspirational pneumonia, and all of his vital signs were excellent. He was communicating, walking, all of that, but he had to go in a feeding tube. And then he had an onset of dementia all at the same time. So he felt like we were depriving him of food. He didn't understand he was eating. It was just a very, very challenging time. And he was naturally a combative person. So he fought people. So they kept him drugged. And one morning he just didn't wake up. Yeah. But it's really sad because I had to figure out whether to support him getting the feeding tube.
Yeah.
The doctors had me view his swallow test, and everything was just going straight to his lungs.
Becky, was palliative care involved at all in that situation? Because
not really.
That's
I
the
didn't
specialty.
live there, and my brother couldn't really. He was really had the DPOA.
Oh, okay.
And he was working full time, so it wasn't a really good situation.
This is the type of situation that palliative care, because we'll actually do comfort feeds. So if people, they shouldn't be eating, but they, like me, I tell my girlfriends, I want them to cram chocolate in my mouth around in the tracheal tube,
Right.
But palliative care could take a step back and look at the overall situation for your dad and maybe make some recommendations that
Yeah. Well,
would
this was 2014. I don't know how extensive palliative care was then.
Not as much as it is now. It's true.
Yeah, it was tough, really rough times. So it's good to have all this paperwork in place because you just never know what situations are going to arise and you have to make decisions. Luckily, I do have doctors in the family, so I was able, I talked to them, got their recommendations and all that.
Good.
But it was tough. It was still very tough.
Yeah.
One of the important things that we're discussing here and all the way through your presentation, and it's so appreciated, is to highlight the need for those conversations with family, not only to have things in writing, but to have those values communicated as to what are people's wishes.
They definitely go hand in hand.
Yeah.
It's a tough discussion though, because some people just do not want to go there, right? They don't want to think about it. They want to push it away.
True.
We'll talk about it when we get there, but then it's too late at that point.
I kind of like to think of the advanced directive documents as the letter of the law, but then the DPOA, the durable power of attorney for healthcare, I think of that person as the spirit of the law. So even if my directive says I don't want a ventilator, but what I need is an angiogram, my DPOA knows that, oh no, she wouldn't want that. So how does one look into palliative care is a question that just came through. And you typically, there's inpatient and outpatient palliative care. So it depends on the facility you're at. But if it's somebody who's in a hospital, you can ask the bedside nurse, do you have palliative care? And then ask for a referral. If it's an outpatient situation, someone has just been given a terminal diagnosis or something like that, then you can look for if you just do a search for palliative care in whatever your healthcare system is, they'll pop up and you can call and see because they're not as widespread as we would like. Sometimes they're a little picky about who they will and won't put on their list of patients. So it can be a challenge. And in small towns, we're really lucky here because we have it in all of the UW system, Virginia Mason, Swedish, all of our major ones have. I don't know about Overlake, but I'd be surprised if they didn't in Evergreen. I'm sure Evergreen does because they have a good hospice. So, but just doing a search and asking to be taken on.
Are there any other questions from anyone in the group? Any other questions for Patsy?
I have one, Patsy, just quickly. This is Rebecca Haefele, but loved your presentation. Thought it was just, required, really required for everyone. I lost my grandmother a couple of years ago, and she was in New York. But one thing that I found, just being 3,000 miles away, with my dad being the primary caregiver, my sister was there. She doesn't have exactly a clinical background, but she knows enough to help maneuver to help ask the right questions.
Oh, good.
However, my sister is not a confrontational person. So, and my dad is very much in charge. So she let my dad be in charge. But what they found was that the doctor has seen my grandmother. I mean, she was in her 90s. She's seen him probably since he graduated from med school. So,
wow.
So he's got a long relationship with her, but he's trying to do everything he can to keep her alive.
Yeah.
To solve the problem. And what would be your advice? Oh, look, here's the school district calling. Okay.
Uh-oh.
I wonder which kid missed a class. So I'm wondering what your advice would be to a family and how to engage, and particularly clinicians where I live in where I'm from in rural upstate New York. clinicians are viewed as being very intimidating. So people don't tend to advocate for themselves. But, you know, it seems like we should have asked earlier, and we should have. And we discovered, my sister overheard a conversation in the hallway with between the nurse and the doctor, and the nurse was telling him she needs end-of-life care, and the doctor wouldn't budge until the family asked. And I'm like, Mandy, why didn't you, tell Dad? And she's like, no, Dad just wasn't ready to hear it yet.
Yeah.
So meanwhile, she went through dialysis, and she was,
that's
she was never
a perfect situation for palliative care to get involved. And you can, I mean, it's really hard. We call it tincture of doctor because it's really hard for some people to talk to doctors, and some doctors are more difficult to talk to than others. But palliative care, one of their real strengths is asking questions, trying to figure out what the values are. I mean, an over 90-year-old person being put on dialysis is, not every place would do that, because dialysis is a scarce resource. But that's not the main reason. The main reason is at 90 years old, the chance for complications from dialysis or from because when you're that old, your systems are really easily pushed over. A little extra fluid and you go into congestive heart failure. Too much diuretic, you go into kidney failure. So it's a balancing act when people are younger and they're on dialysis, but when you're older, it's a real challenge to do. So I would say palliative care would have been a way to go. Talking with that nurse a little more and trying to see, what are some ways we agree with you. It's time for end of life. What are some ways we can make that happen in this hospital? The other thing is I didn't really mention too much is the comfort care orders. And we have a set of orders when we withdraw life support. We have a set of orders that are just for when we withdraw life support. And some of the nurses use this as an educational tool. Not only do we withdraw life support often, we do it so often that we have pre-printed orders for it. So that can be very reassuring to people because nobody wants to feel like they killed grandma, and so it is very challenging. But if you're carrying out grandma's wishes, doing what grandma would have wanted, it's a different feel than, oh, hey, I pulled the plug on granny today. So palliative care could have potentially helped.
Yeah. Yep. We should have done it earlier. So, but anyway, thank you.
Yeah.
And I agree with all the comments about Harborview. I've been treated there before, and it was
good. Oh, great. It's so good to hear.
Nurses,
Patsy and everyone, we need to wrap this up. And so I'm going to proceed to do that. And I want to thank you, Patsy, so much.
Sure.
It's been a wonderful presentation. And we have learned so much from you this evening. More to think about, more to do, more to talk about. Also, I want to thank and mention to everyone that two of our co-founders of the endowment are present with us tonight, Sherry Kranick and Becky Birch. So thank you for being with us. And for everyone who's here, please remember that in 2 to 3 months, we will have another one of our legacy series. We will get the information out to you, and we hope that you will think about us in your plans and keep learning and stay tuned.